Welcome to Unapologetically Yours, a podcast where we go deep on everything from spirituality to relationships and connection to business and belief systems. Because in a world where we've been taught to play by the rules, it's time to live unapologetically. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Unapologetically Yours. I'm your host, Ashley Logan, and I'm so happy to have you here today. For those of you who don't know, I am a mother of three. I'm an entrepreneur. I am an artist, a creator. I am founder and CEO of a content marketing agency called Yakety Yak, and I wear a lot of different hats in my life. And today I want to talk a little bit about the journey of motherhood and what that looks like. Right now in this political climate, we have so much banter around reproductive health and reproductive rights. And that's something that is particularly important to me because of my own personal experiences and the experiences of the women that I know in my life. So I knew since I was a little girl that I wanted to be a mother. I was a baby hog. I spent as much time as I could with little babies in the nursery at church. And I just thought that I knew that it was something that I wanted for myself in the future. And as soon as I got married, we went for it. We were lucky enough to get pregnant with our first child without a lot of fanfare, and it was just such a remarkable experience. And being scared shitless too when you see the positive pregnancy test. But I want to talk a little bit about the journey of being a woman, and this is something that I don't know that men have ever even considered. Only a woman knows what it's like to check your underwear for blood and, depending on the stage of your life, either be terrified to see blood or be so relieved to see blood. I'm talking about your period. And when I was probably 18, I made the decision that no matter what happened, that I would, if I ever got pregnant, I would have the baby because I'm lucky enough to have the resources and I'm a super strong person and very resourceful. I made the decision for myself that if I ever found out that I was pregnant, that abortion was off the table for me. And I couldn't have predicted what would happen next in my life. But there was many times when I would be completely relieved to get my period because I wasn't ready to become a mother, or the person who I'd been with was not going to be it's not the person I wanted to be a father, and to have that relief. And then when I got pregnant with my daughter, the constant, every time I would go to the bathroom, checking my underwear to make sure that nothing was wrong, that there was no indication of bleeding early on in the pregnancy. And for those of us who are able to have babies, we are painfully aware of the fact that 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in miscarriage. And so it's a real fear to think about what could a body's natural rejection of a pregnancy. So my first pregnancy was really difficult. I have a very short torso. I gained a ton of weight. My belly stretched out enormously. And I also had a irritable uterus. And that meant that for starting really just after 20 weeks in the pregnancy, I was I was having contractions all the time. And so it was difficult for me to tell, is the baby coming now? Is the baby coming later? Because it was my first pregnancy. So I spent a lot of time in and out of the ER with a little monitor strapped to my belly to make sure that I wasn't in preterm labor. Had to have different shots to make sure that the baby's lungs developed just in case she came early. And I ended up delivering her at 38 weeks, a beautiful 8-pound, 6-ounce little girl. The delivery itself was really, really rough. She was a shoulder dystocia baby, which basically means that her head came out, but her shoulders didn't. And so the doctors had to creatively find a way to remove her from my body. Luckily, she was unharmed, and I took the brunt of the trauma of the birth with third-degree tears, and that in itself was a traumatic experience. And we don't talk enough about traumatic birth and what that can mean for a woman, and the recovery process that goes with that. It wasn't really until I got pregnant with my second child, a boy, that I understood what happened in the first pregnancy. And they told me that I wasn't going to be able to have a bigger baby, and there's no way to predict the size of a baby. And so they recommended a C-section for me. I was lucky that had no problem getting pregnant again. And so then the negotiation that I had with my OB was, okay, if I go into labor before the scheduled C-section, I'd like to consider a vaginal birth. And I, as luck would have it, went into labor the night before the scheduled C-section. And so the doctor looked at me and she's like, it's really up to you, but I think that the safest road ahead here is that you have a C-section. So at this point, I'm in active labor, dilated halfway there. It was a totally different labor experience than my daughter. In hindsight, part of me wishes that I had advocated for myself and said, no, I think that everything's going to be okay. But when faced with, a doctor looking at you and telling you that it's the safest option to have a C-section, I think that many could understand why I did make that choice. So my son was born via emergency C-section late into the night before the scheduled C-section. And knowing him now, I know that it would have been a perfect delivery, because he is like the most determined, competitive little boy. But hindsight is 2020, and really there's no way of me knowing what would happen next. So at this point, I've got 2 little babies going through the journey of navigating breastfeeding, work. Oh my gosh, the early stages of motherhood and the noise that comes with being a mom in America about what car seat to get, what to put on your baby registry, what you're going to feed the baby. I got pressure around, I got a lot of feedback about breastfeeding in general, and that not being a good thing, when many other messages were saying that it was a great thing. And so moms in America just really can't win when it comes to the feedback and the messaging that we receive. And so I feel pretty strongly that instead of focusing on registries and other things, we should focus on helping moms tap into their own self-love, self-worth, their intuition, so that they can be the best mother for their baby. Because as we know, every child is different, their needs are different, and on and on. So at this phase in my life, I'm working a ton, managing a little baby, a toddler, and figuring out how to make this life work with, a million influences and opinions coming at me all the time. It was a blur. This was 2018. So by the time my son turned 1, I was really excited about a new work opportunity that presented itself to go to Ireland to help work a conference for one of my clients. And the deal sort of came together at the last minute. I didn't charge enough money. And any entrepreneur knows that, sometimes you can compromise on the opportunity. In this case, I didn't necessarily charge my worth, booked a shitty seat on a shitty flight to Dublin. And I had asked my then husband to join me on the trip, and it conflicted with the Bears home opener. So he decided to stay home. And so I had planned to go by myself. Well, what we didn't know is that I was pregnant. So then boarded the plane in my shitty seat. I was on Aer Lingus. I was trying to remember what the flight was. And I remember sitting in the back of this plane thinking to myself, what the fuck am I doing here? As the guy in front of me reclined to my seat. And I didn't sleep on the plane. It was a long flight and just started to question everything. Like, how am I compromising my health for work? What are my priorities? And was in a little bit of a dark place when I landed in Dublin. And then was really happy to kind of be able to present to a large group to help work with the conference, and had all sorts of meetings set up that would help advance the state of my agency at the time, which was certainly in growth mode. And so here I was by myself in a foreign country, and I go to the bathroom, and the first thing I do is check for blood. And there was blood. And I thought, oh my God, what the fuck? And I just knew in my body that I was going to lose the pregnancy. And so I found a euro and put it in the little vending machine in the bathroom and got a thick pad that comes out in these little boxes. Every woman knows what I'm talking about. And then had to continue with my day. So I sat through multiple meetings in tremendous pain, horrible cramping as the blood started to increase throughout the day. And it's an interesting dichotomy sitting across from someone who has no fucking idea what is happening in your mind or in your body, and trying to negotiate deals and pitch new ideas for potential clients. And at that point in the mid-afternoon, I wrapped up my meetings and wrapped up my obligations, and I was set to move hotels so I could have another night in Dublin before flying back the next day. And I had so I packed up all my stuff, moved to another hotel. I don't know how I made it from the first hotel to the next. I was in so much pain. And for anyone who has miscarried, it's not a pretty process, and there's tissue involved, and it's really terrible. And I remember kind of like cleaning myself up and then flushing the tissue down the toilet, and just thinking about how I was leaving such a big part of me in Dublin, and just how painful and traumatic the experience was. So I went to the drugstore and I bought a bottle of wine and a pregnancy test. And the pregnancy test came back and was already faded. So it was clear to me that this was a clean miscarriage. And then I just mourned the loss of the possibilities that I had been thinking about with this potential member of our family. And I remember boarding the flight the next day, same thing, wearing a pad, still bleeding. You bleed for several days after a miscarriage. And also, I had a colleague who had joined me on the trip, and I remember being out to dinner with him the night before, and, thinking about like this guy who was, in his mid-20s in a foreign country. And I was like, well, I don't want to leave him alone. We've got dinner plans. I want to recap the experience. And then also sitting here having dinner with him. I think I had like some traditional shepherd's pie, and thinking like he has no idea that I'm actively miscarrying right now. And I just found that to be so interesting, that you never know what someone is going through. So fast forward, boarded the plane and sort of left that part of me behind as I crossed the Atlantic back to Chicago. And it's one of those things that, again, if you don't experience it, you don't know what it's like to feel the pain, to see the blood, to kind of release the dreams. And some might say, well, at 5 or 6 weeks pregnant, you shouldn't even be thinking about that. You should know better. And the mind does what the mind does. And family planning is complicated, and and it is what it is. So I was lucky because the very next month I got pregnant with my youngest child, another boy. He's an absolute warrior, and that was in itself a unique pregnancy because he was born in May of 2020. So via C-section, because that made the most sense after having one C-section, and I was also like, get this fucking kid out of me. Being pregnant during the pandemic was one of the most stressful things that you could imagine, because I was so worried about like getting COVID and then being separated from my baby. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but luckily that didn't happen. Brought home a healthy baby boy, and life moved forward. Well, that wasn't the end of my miscarriage story. And I was lucky that the first experience was a complete miscarriage. So that means that my body fully expelled the full embryo. And so I didn't have to have any follow-up DNC, didn't have to have any follow-up treatment to make sure that the tissues were removed from my body, because when the tissues remain, they can cause infection. And then in January of 2022, I found out that I was pregnant again with what would have been our fourth baby. And this was just such an interesting time of life. My marriage was not in a good place. We were both very aware that bringing another child into the world would add stress and complexities. But for me, my dream had always been a big family. Lots of kids and dogs is something that I've said often. And 3 kids wasn't lots. 3 kids was average. And 4, that was lots. So I was overjoyed. I could feel the presence of a girl circling me for months, and I knew this baby was a little girl. And so despite the road and the complexities that lay ahead, my mind started to wander about having my oldest daughter, helping to care for a little baby, and what life could look like and all of the possibilities there. So when I went to see my OB for the first time, she said, are you sure about the dates? This doesn't seem to be progressing. And something, I could tell that something was off in my body, but remained hopeful. She said, I don't know if you have your dates right, so I want you to come back in a couple of weeks. Well, then I got COVID. And at this point, after every time I peed, multiple times a day, checking for blood, no blood, I finally made it back to the doctor, and I was by myself and had an appointment with my OB, who was the first doctor who had confirmed the pregnancy with my oldest daughter. And I remember at that time sitting there so nervous, and then hearing the squishy little sound of a heartbeat. And then 8 years later, or I guess how many years? Yeah, 6 years later, the sound of silence. The only heartbeat that she could hear was mine. And she said, I'm so sorry. This is what we call a missed miscarriage. It's an empty sac. And so at that point, I was probably 10 or 11 weeks into the pregnancy, and my body hadn't acknowledged that the pregnancy wasn't viable and was holding on to the embryo. So an empty sac still means that there's a sac. It still means that there's tissue, and that tissue is evolved. And at that time, post-pandemic, there was still major supply chain issues happening. And so she said, okay, well, we've got 3 options. You can have a DNC. You can take the abortion pill at home to expel the pregnancy, or you can wait until your body naturally releases the tissue. And about a week or 2 later, I had planned a 40th birthday trip to Mexico for like 25 people. And I believed that I owed myself the peace of mind to not leave the country again, with the potential of having the blood and having all of that stuff happen on the trip. So waiting wasn't an option for me. And I was so glad to have that choice. So I opted for the DNC because it felt like the most clean, easy way to make sure that I would put my body in a position of safety in for the trip coming up and make sure that all of the tissue was removed so I wouldn't have any infection. So then she's like, oh, sorry, because of supply chain issues, you have to, DNC is not an option. We don't have the tubing. And I was like, cool. So she wrote me a prescription for mifepristone and misoprostol. I know mifepristone is one of but the combination of pills that is known as the abortion pills. And I took one in her office, and then I had to go to a pharmacy to fill the other half of the prescription. And so maybe I didn't take it in her office. I left her office with the pill. Had to go to a pharmacy to get the other one. And there was like an issue with where she called it in. So it wasn't where I thought it was going to be. I ended up going to 5 different places before I finally got the prescription. And then the drive-through was closed. So I remember walking inside and the teller there saying, you can't take this while you're pregnant. And I was like, thanks, asshole. Thanks. So I go home, and I'd mentioned that things were a little rocky at home. And I remember taking the pills, and the process and the cramping started pretty quickly. And so that night I miscarried in my bed with all 3 children, and the tremendous pain that went with that emotionally and physically was not to be ignored. And I was so grateful for the choice that I could expel the pregnancy on my terms instead of, as having it release on a plane to Cancun a week later, or while I'm at the pool or on a boat or anything, and which would have just prolonged the pain of the whole experience. But by and large, what I had was an abortion. It was removing an embryo from my body. And I feel like in this climate, we are missing the nuance of reproductive health, and that every single woman has an experience that it has her own life path that impacts the decisions that she makes. Had I not already had a miscarriage overseas, my appetite for letting the pregnancy expel naturally might have been higher, but I'd done that and it fucking sucked. And so I didn't want to do that again. So I leaned into my doctor, and we made the decision about what was going to be the safest for me, for my body, for my 3 children at home. And that was to have an abortion. And while the fetus wasn't viable, and at that point, it's not even a fetus, it's a zygote, embryo was not viable, I had the choice. And what I think we're missing in this deeply patriarchal, capitalistic society that pits women against one another is that I don't know a single woman who I don't trust to make a decision about her body, about her health, about her well-being, about her family. I bet you don't either. Yet we have been fed lie after lie that there are women out there who are using abortion for birth control, and that we are killing babies and all of these things that's just so absolutely fucking ludicrous. Sex is intimate. It is personal. Pregnancy is intimate. And it is personal. And the choice that a woman makes is the product of 1,000 different choices that brought her to that moment. And every one of those decisions matters and is relevant. And I think about how things like fucking like live birth abortion, which is just not a thing. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. It's ludicrous. Or late-term abortion are positioned to the public. And these, in 98%, I'd venture to say 99 or 100% of the time, those pregnancy terminations are for deeply wanted babies. So I think about what it would be like as a mother of 3 to have a growing belly and to have my kids be all excited about a sibling to come, and then to go to a 20-week ultrasound and find out that the baby has anencephalitis and no brainstem and is absolutely not going to live outside the womb, and have the government tell me that I have to then continue that pregnancy until it's full term to deliver the baby for it to die. I can't think of anything more torturous, not just for the mother, but for the children who are then confused about where's the baby going to live? Where's the crib? And then having conversations that the baby is actually not going to live at all. Those are the deepest, most personal conversations and choices. And it might just work for someone to deliver that baby full term, to hold the child in their arms. And it is perfectly okay and perfectly reasonable for that not to be the choice you want to make because of the circumstances that you might be in. And then I think about the women who are diagnosed with cancer, who have, again, children at home, and the option to either terminate the pregnancy that their body is hosting or delay their cancer treatment and possibly put themselves in a life or death situation when they have other children at home. Or maybe they are the one who brings in, maybe they're a single parent. Maybe they have a dysfunctional marriage. Maybe they're the sole provider. There are a million reasons why someone would want to bring a child into this world. And there are a million reasons why maybe they wouldn't. And I go back to, I think about this narrative of how women have been pitted against each other in the media and taught to be in competition with one another. But when you close your eyes and you think about your sister or your daughter or your best friend going through any number of the possibilities that can happen to someone when they're pregnant, and it changes the landscape. And one of the biggest things and the biggest reminders that we can have as humans is that we are all one. We are all one. And when we forget that the person making that choice is a human, we lose our own humanity and our ability to relate to one another, because there is not a single woman I don't trust to make a decision about her body. And I promise you that you don't know any either. So obviously, abortion's on the ballot. Obviously, women's health is on the ballot. And reframing the narrative and thinking about all of the little idiosyncrasies that can happen in a pregnancy, in one person's life, all of the different scenarios that can go wrong. This is not a state's issue. I was talking to one of the leading OBs in Chicago recently, and she was saying that one of the biggest fears for new moms in Illinois, which is a blue state with some of the most protected abortion rights in the country, they're scared to travel to states where women's health is not prioritized and getting advised by their professionals to not go. So for the working woman who's feeling great in the early stage of her pregnancy, who has a South by Southwest conference in Austin, Texas, that has some of the most restrictive abortion laws and the least amount of care for women's health, with clinics closing all around the states, she's being advised to stay home. I had never considered that before, that while people are traveling to states to have healthcare services provided to them, that women are unable to travel to other states. It's like Zika all over again. For those of us who've been pregnant recently, like, you're advised not to go to places where there's a high mosquito population or Zika is prevalent. So I remember being pregnant with my second and canceling a trip to the Bahamas because you weren't supposed to go because it wasn't safe. It could impact your baby and your body. And then now I'm thinking about this. Wow, women are opting out of going to Texas because they are pregnant and scared that one of the many things that could happen to a woman's body during pregnancy could happen to them, and they wouldn't receive the treatment they need from an ectopic pregnancy, which the only treatment available is an abortion or you die, is ludicrous to me. So whether you would have an abortion or not, whether you would support a child in the case of rape or incest who becomes pregnant and help them deliver a baby and care for it on their own, wherever, God, oh my God, like even just saying that out loud is just so disgusting to me, that children and victims of rape and incest, and not just children, but women victims of rape and incest, don't get to make the choice about their body. What I encourage all of us to do is release our own, the choice that maybe you would make in the situation, because your economic circumstances, your resources, all of those things are different than the person next to you. And you don't know what they're going through. You don't know if the baby's wanted. You don't know if they've had a miscarriage and then have to have a surgical procedure to have it removed. You don't know the nuance and the details, but we must show up for each other in love. We must stop the narrative of finger pointing about what you would do, what you wouldn't do, that there's all of these people out there murdering babies, which is just such an absolutely ludicrous narrative. There are women who are making choices about their bodies in the best interests of their family, and we must trust women. I really appreciate the opportunity to go deep, to share a little bit about my reproductive journey here, the good, the bad, the ugly. I am so lucky that I have 3 healthy and beautiful children. And I recently got a tattoo on my arm as a reflection of my family. I have the birth flowers of my daughter, my 2 sons, and then I have 2 little buds for the children that didn't make it earthside, the babies, the embryos, however you want to frame it. And in this life, we must show compassion to one another, because we never know what someone else is going through. We never know the framework of the decisions that they have to make. And we never know the yearning and the desires of their hearts that might lead them to have to make a choice. And also the fact that pregnancy is extremely complicated. There's 1,000 different scenarios that can go right and things that can go wrong. And the best thing that we can do is show up in compassion to one another and trust women and believe that women will make the best choices for their bodies and their health and their families, and support them, and just make sure they have the resources to do what they need to do to raise the next generation of children, and to show up in society as contributors, and to be the whole ass fucking people that they are, and they deserve that, whatever choice they make. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thanks for giving me the chance to go deep. I'm Ashley, and I am always unapologetically yours. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go out, make some mischief in the world. And until then, I'm Ashley, and I'm unapologetically yours.